Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Special Committee on Government Records Retention. Today is Friday, October 23rd. We have with us today Peter Bevan Baker, Gord McNeely, Hal Perry, Sydney MacEwen, and Corey Deagle. And so I'll call the meeting to order, and thank you everyone for being here today. I'll ask for an adoption of the agenda. Corey? And we have with us today Juliana MacEwen of Precision Digital Imaging Services. And we've asked Juliana to join us today as an expert for record retention processes. And so Juliana, without further ado, I'm just going to pass it over to you. You can go ahead with your presentation. We'll hold our questions to the end if the committee members are fine with that. And then we will continue after you're finished. So thank you for joining us. I'm looking forward to your presentation.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you, everyone, for having me here today. My name is Juliana MacEwen, as the Chair has mentioned. My company is Precision Digital Imaging, and I've been in the records management business for about 20 years now. Just to give you a little bit of background on myself, I started off my career working in health, and I worked in PEI, Department of Health, for about 15 years. And kind of probably the last 10 years of that time, I was working in records and information management. I worked with the group that I'm sure you remember when there was some restructuring done in health when the Provincial Health Services Authority was created at the time. There was a need to develop a records retention and disposition schedule at that time. So I was one of the records managers on that committee that developed that retention schedule. Worked very closely over the years with Anne-Marie McIsaac. I'm sure some of you may know that name as the person involved with the records currently with government. And after that, I moved on into the implementation of, I was on the implementation team for the electronic health record implementation for health. I was the person responsible for the training side of things and getting everyone trained in how to move from a very paper-based charting environment into an electronic system for everyone within the Department of Health at the time. Then from there I moved and purchased, I actually left government then and went into business and doing more records and information management, consulting, and scanning of microfilm and paper is kind of the main focus of our company. So we help organizations take a very paper-based world and apply policies and procedures as well as backfile scanning, and we get them kind of up and running in a digital environment and then put systems in place to help them do day forward scanning or digitization or whatever the case might be depending on the organization. So today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what kind of I've seen in the modern records management world, some barriers that we've come across over the years, and some things that I've seen through other organizations implementing digital processes that kind of have helped them be successful. And I want to just say that again, I'm very honored to be here. If you have any questions, feel free. We might try to keep the questions to the end, but certainly if something pops up while I'm speaking and you want to ask me about it, I appreciate the dialogue back and forth. And it'll give me a chance to catch my breath if you have questions. Okay.
Kind of, yeah.
So, the first thing I wanted to just share with you is a quote from AIM International. And AIM is one of the professional organizations that records and information management professionals belong to. The other one is ARMA. And essentially, AIM says that the role of records management is being redefined in organizations across the world. It's no longer enough to be a steward of the information. Business executives are looking at records management to play a critical role in accelerating business activities, enriching government customer experiences, and improving operational agility. And this is important, an important place to start, because I find that over the years, records in the past have been very much out of sight, out of mind kind of thing, and more so an afterthought of a business process, where in today's modern world, it should be very much the forefront. Information is so critical these days, and protecting it and making it accessible is very important. So records should be brought to the forefront and should be part of every conversation, regardless if it's a new project or if it's something that's been ongoing for a long time. The records management side of whatever that situation is should be at the forefront, and how you manage that information is extremely important. These are just some of the kind of key terms that I thought I would just share with you today as far as what a modern records management system should look like. So you want to ensure that it's that records management is positioned as a business enabler. So it enables you to do business, to make informed decisions, and to move your organization forward in a very positive and transparent nature. Records management should capture records efficiently, regardless of the format. And a record is a record is a record. So regardless if it's an email, if it's something on your mobile devices, if it's in paper, regardless of what it is, it needs to be captured efficiently and obviously protected appropriately. The use of automation should be very should be at the forefront, and I'll talk more about why that's important later as we move into looking at the modern records management user in today's environment. Records should support privacy and e-discovery requirements. We are all legislated with FOIP and different types of privacy legislations. So we need to make sure that our records are following those guidelines so that we can provide the information back when it's requested. Records should be managed effectively throughout the record's life cycle. So it's not only important to have the information in a file folder beside you or on your desk when you're working on a particular file, but it's very important to manage and understand what the life cycle of that record is. And again, I'll talk a little, I'm not going to bore you guys with all the minutiae of the details, but it's very important to understand what the life cycle of a record is and how to manage it effectively. And then implement digital record keeping systems. We are in a world of so much information today, and we need to be able to use technology and digital record keeping to help us manage that information. And having a good, solid digital system in place, it will allow the information to be available within the organization and stay within the organization. You know, I'm sure we all work with people that have all kinds of great information about the organization, and we say, oh, what are we going to do when that person retires? Well, one thing you can do is make sure that all of the information is captured in a way that it doesn't walk out the door when that person leaves, that you have that content around you when you need it. The evolution of records management has certainly had its challenges, and I'm going to just kind of, I thought this little chart was a great way of showing kind of what we've had to kind of deal with over the years. And when you combine all of these challenges with the ease of creating and printing paper, we are faced with all kinds of challenges around information silos, overabundance of paper to manage, redundancy and duplication of information, and potential security breaches that are hard to trace. So we need to have systems in place and infrastructure in place and policies in place that can deal with all of these evolving challenges that we are dealing with every day. So technology, or the lack thereof, is kind of one of the challenges that we're faced with today. And there's a lot of legacy systems in most organizations that do not natively provide objects suitable to become consistent records or archived properly. And what I've noticed over the years is that anytime people would implement a system, when they would talk to IT folks about, or even if it was thought of in the first place, sometimes records retention wasn't even necessarily thought of in the creation of these systems, because storage is cheap, is what the terminology was, and you can buy terabytes and terabytes of storage space. So why should we worry about managing it when it's just so cheap to keep it all? Well, keeping it all is not following proper records management practices. So the lack of that type of stuff provided within legacy systems is hard for for records managers to follow the processes through, because, as I said earlier, a record is a record. So if a record has reached at the end of its life cycle and it needs to be disposed of and deleted or shredded or whatever the case might be, it's easy to shred a file, a paper file. But have you thought about the emails you might have, the content that's on shared drives, all of that kind of stuff? If it's out there, then the record is still out there, and you need to understand and figure out ways that when a record is supposed to be destroyed, it's destroyed. All of it, not just that paper copy. But having said that, data is knowledge and knowledge is power. So when we have information that is left isolated or unutilized and siloed, then organizations can be ineffective. So in having the technology in place to allow information sharing to be much easier, that will help organizations grow and become more effective. Another challenge I've noticed over the years is the cultural challenge. And the value of information is often disregarded or cannot be defined when information is originally created. So again, this is because sometimes the record keeping of a certain project or situation is an afterthought. We need to move the record keeping processes and to the forefront, and we need to make sure that even though you may not think that it's your responsibility to manage that information or manage that information effectively, as you'll see later on in the presentation, we are all modern records management users. And I think that's a big part of a cultural shift that we need to introduce within our organizations, in that gone are the days that we have someone to look after that for us. We are all creating documents, we are all creating records, so we all need to understand what to do with them. It's the same as, if you're on a project and you need financial or legal advice. Well, you may not be the expert, but you need to understand how that's going to affect your project. So you need to understand how information management and taking care of the information is going to affect your project or whatever it is that you're working on. So records management today has to start with the creation of information. Otherwise, information cannot be managed when it arrives in records management and archive systems. So it's really difficult for an archivist or a records manager to do what needs to happen with records if they're always considered as an afterthought. And if the people that are using the information are not aware of proper processes to deal with the information, then that gets tricky. And just we know that digital technology is changing the way companies do business, and there's just a few little stats there of how digital transformation is really kind of coming to the forefront. And Helen Finucci of Microsoft has kind of come up with these few statistics, and one of them is that I jumped out at me is that as of 2020, digital strategies will drive 60% of IT speed. So if we're going to provide, if we want to be a culture where access to information and the protection of information is important, we need to have the IT infrastructure behind it to support that. The information growth challenge is another challenge. As I mentioned earlier, there's so much information available to us today that it can cause uncontrolled redundancy. And records management has to address the complete life cycle and is in no way only a pre-preservation issue. So we need to understand what information is important and how we need to protect it. And again, going back to software applications, there's letting the software and allowing the technology to help you do that is key in this day and age, especially when now we have people working from home, people working from essentially anywhere in the world. You need to have access to your information, so you need to have the proper technology and processes in place to be able to do that safely. This is also another challenge that I've noticed. And as I said earlier, gone are the days that we have someone that just kind of takes care of everything for us. And we can go to that person and say, I need this file or I need this document. And they can just go over and pull it off the shelf and hand it to you. We don't have the resources to kind of support that anymore in this day and age, and hopefully none of your offices look like the picture on the right there, because that's a lot of paper surrounding that poor guy. But we do want to, we do need to have things in place so that the guy that's working in that sea of paper can have everything more organized, but he needs to organize that stuff himself. He needs to understand about records management and the life cycle of information, and then he can maybe be more proactive so that his office doesn't look like that. And I'm not going to read all of these, but these are just a few kind of things that I've heard over the years when you look at your typical records manager versus what I'm calling today the modern records management user. The modern records management user is all of us. The records manager is the person that we think is responsible for records management. But those days are gone where, yes, there's probably somebody that oversees it and makes sure that policies and procedures are being followed, but the modern records management user needs to be involved. And we need to support them through training and communication and technology and automation, all of those things to help them be able to do that. So again, records managers, I'll just compare a couple here. They're excellent in structured searches. They are used to expert faceted search forms. The modern records management user hate complex data entry forms. They want to trust in automation and categorization. So the modern records management user wants to be, if they need to put something away into a content management system, they don't want to have to think about where it needs to go and the file structure and following like the hierarchy of the file tree to make sure that document gets to the right place. They want to put it in there, you know, maybe fill in a few fields, maybe some of it's automated where the system will pull information off the form for them and it gets indexed and it's there and it's correct and it's consistent and everybody is doing it the same way. The records manager still believe they own their records and really care for them. The modern records management user thinks they're just using information as part of their daily life, but they're not really responsible for that information. And and records managers are specialists in determining the value of records. They work busily to keep information unique and accessible and available for all time. The modern records management user knows that a 1 terabyte hard drive is very cheap, and they believe that will always be enough storage space for everything. So you'll see how some of the thinking is very different depending on the records manager versus the modern records management user. We need to try to close that gap. And to do that, we need to educate everybody within the organization, not just people that have records management attached to their job title. It needs to be something that is communicated and shared with everybody within your organization. So those are some of the challenges. These are the keys to a successful modern records management system that I've kind of noticed. We'll take a look at each one of these in a little more detail. So the program is funded and supported from the top down is number one. Another key to success is that it enables organizational buy-in and embraces digital transformation. So the first one, what does that mean? Or funded and supported from the top down? Well, we need to make sure that there's proper budget allocations in place. Typically, records management, it's been very difficult to get funding and money to support this industry because as again, the culture and people seeing records as an afterthought and not as important as they should be treated, sometimes it gets left as, okay, well, if we have a little money at the end of the fiscal year to support a project, then yes, maybe we'll take a look at doing something around records management. Well, that kind of thinking has to stop. It has to be put to the forefront of your discussions where it's important to spend money to make sure that you have the software, the hardware, the infrastructure, and the correct human resource requirements to do the job right. So again, hiring appropriate resources is very important. And again, I'm going through all of these and I honestly have no idea what's currently in place right now for government. These are just kind of things that I've learned. So you might have some of this stuff and maybe you don't, but that's for a further discussion. Hiring the appropriate resources, having a chief information officer is important, having records managers and IT and IM professionals in place that's what they do. They understand information management and that they work together to put the systems in place that everybody needs. Provide necessary training to staff. And again, when I say staff, I don't just mean records managers. I mean the modern records management user. Everybody needs the cheat sheets. They need the tips and tricks. They need the lunch and learns. They need all of the information so that they can do their job correctly around records management. Support necessary infrastructure requirements. So there needs to be budget and a requirement for enterprise information management systems with records management built in at the front end. We need to eliminate the information silos that are sitting on shared drives and stored on paper records. And again, some paper records they're sitting in offices, in basements, in closets, they're sitting in places essentially disintegrating. And if the life cycle or the retention period of that document is 25 years or life, then that record sitting there disintegrating is not going to be around for 25 years or for a lifetime. So things need to be put in place to take care of those records, get them digitized or microfilmed, or looking at other ways of making sure that information does stay around. And again, you might think that if you scan something to PDF and you put it on a shared drive that you've done your due diligence as far as saving that information and making it accessible. But using shared drives is essentially just one more step towards an unorganized shared drive is the same as all that paper sitting there with no real classification scheme developed around it. So we need to make sure that we bring all of that information together so that A, it's in one place and easy to find, and you're not going to a paper document for some information and your shared drive for some other information and your email for more information. If you have an enterprise content management system, you should be able to have all of that information in one place on that particular record. And also it's important to have accountability measures in place. So you want to ensure that processes and resources are in place to follow through with appropriate retention and disposition. And also auditing and security measures need to be in place. So first of all, if you're looking at following through on retention and disposition, well, first of all, you need to educate folks on what that is and who is responsible for maintaining the life cycle of that record and who is responsible for following that record through its entire life cycle. And then as important is the auditing measures. If you have paper sitting on your desk and somebody just happens to glance and read it, well, there's no way of auditing and keeping track of who's seen that information. But if you have everything in an electronic content management system with auditing systems in place, you will know every single digital footprint of somebody that's been into and looking at anything within that system. So that was an important thing in health when we were implementing the electronic health record. One of the biggest fears in the organization was that everybody was worried about information breaches from electronic information, everything being electronic. But one of the things I would say to them, well, if a paper x-ray report was left at the coffee shop or something was sitting on somebody's desk and somebody happened to glance at it on the way by, or there was records in a building that just were forgotten about and people got into that building, there's no way of knowing who access that information, who looked at it. But if that same information is in an electronic system, you always have the ability to know who's looked at it, and you also have the ability to decide who is allowed to see it, which is also very important. So a modern records management system also should enable organizational buy-in. So to do that, you want to make sure that you have current and up-to-date policies and procedures. So you want to eliminate print to paper policies, and I'm not sure if there's any of those still around, but if you don't have proper digital document management processes in place and the paper record is still considered your official record, then there could be some departments that are printing emails and printing attachments, adding them to a paper file as that being the record. With using technology, you can eliminate that, and that takes a look at many things, because we have records facilities that are bulging at the seams full of paper. So we need to start looking at ways to downsize that. 10 years ago, the big catchphrase was, we're going to be all paperless. Well, that's never going to happen. We will never be paperless, but I would like everybody to think about becoming paper light. If you can lighten the amount of paper you're using, you're doing lots of great things for the environment, for the access to the information, and for getting rid of the siloed approach, and getting rid of some of the security breaches that are potentially there from a paper environment. You want to have a records management framework that supports a responsible and accountable government. We all know that transparency and authenticity is very important, and those are two words that are used. They have been used in records management since I've started being involved in records management, and probably long before that. It's very important that that everyone sees that you are being transparent with your information, and that the information you are providing and keeping is authentic. And the only way it can be authentic is that you have the systems in place around infrastructure, software, and your policies and procedures to make sure that document is actually authentic. And hasn't been, and what I mean, I guess, by that is it hasn't been, tampered with. In a paper world, people think that the paper document is the only true, authentic document, but you can make your infrastructure support the authenticity of documents by having proper IT systems in place to do that. You need to have solid communication plans, and again, this is around acknowledging the modern records management user and keep modern records management users informed of the big picture. If they know what you're trying to achieve and you educate them and you train them, it will decrease their fear of change. It gives clear expectations on everybody's roles and responsibilities around this being part of everybody's day-to-day work. And the other thing you want to just try not to do is create duplication of effort. And when you implement anything new, people are automatically going to think it's extra work. So you, at the front end, want to very much eliminate that fear by saying, well, if you do it this way, then you don't have to do it this way any longer. And that's extremely important to get buy-in, because none of us want more work these days. We all have enough, so we just need to make sure that we're being efficient. And then finally, embracing digital transformation. So to be successful, you need to kind of take a look at legacy IT systems. We want to create content management systems with records management built in at the front end. And to help the modern records manager do that, or the modern records management user, you want to look at things like forms automation, image and metadata capture, retention and disposition. All of those things can be built into records management systems that are set up electronically, as long as you're looking at that and setting it up at the front end and not trying to apply this stuff after the fact. It can be done, but it's just more difficult with the stuff that's already in the system. You need to take a look at your email systems. Do you have a solid process for filing away that email or that email attachment? Is everybody being consistent? Is everybody doing it the same way every single time? And again, that's where the policy and procedures and training comes into place. The one thing that I've noticed in any kind of litigation is if an organization can say, everybody's doing it this way, we all do it the same way every single time through our normal course of business, then it's acceptable. And it has, but if you say, well, no, I just, my desk drawer was full, so I decided to shred some paper because I needed to house clean, that's not an acceptable answer. So again, you need to have the policies and procedures and you need to educate everyone in the organization of the importance of it. And that's a big key factor, is everybody understanding the importance of it and realizing that it is everyone's responsibility, not just the records managers. And so also your traveling devices, you need to be thinking of those. What information is being discussed and dealt with on there, and is that information becoming part of the official record of business? Because if it's showing some sort of a transaction along the way, then it's part of business correspondence. So is that stuff getting into the records? And is it protected? Automated processes in place, again, to assist the modern records management user. So having drop-down menus for people to select the document type or the retention period that goes with that document type, things like that. An easy button to press to send an email into a content management system, and it automatically indexes it with the correct information. Those are automated processes that will help the everyday users be sure that they're doing it correctly. Remove information silos. Again, I mentioned that a couple of times. Shared drives are something that should be eliminated because we have no control over how that information is being stored and how it's being shared. If you have a content management system, for example, and you share a link to a document within your system, if that document then reaches the end of its life cycle and it gets deleted out of the content management system, then that link is no longer in use. If you email that same document to someone from your shared drive and you send off the email, that document's gone forever, and you have no control over who sees it, who they send it to, and what happens to it. So you want to try to use technology to your advantage as much as you can. Again, become paper light. Digitizing paper is a big way to be successful. And by doing that, taking a look at is there huge rooms of information, especially the information with long retention periods, that should be accessible to people when they need it. Those are the kinds of projects that you should be looking at digitizing and getting that information electronic. And then, of course, day forward automated processes. So, and what I mean by that is, if a piece of paper comes into your desk, is there a way that right off the bat that can be scanned and there's a workflow process that happens electronically? So if that piece of paper needs to travel throughout the organization, instead of it traveling on paper, can it actually travel electronically and the same work be done with that document? RIM, or records managers, and IT folks should be autonomous. There's been years ago, it was very separate. There were records managers doing their jobs over here and IT professionals doing their jobs over here, and they never really worked together. Well, in an information management environment, our records managers and IT folks should be working hand in hand, because with so much technology being available, you need to make sure that you have both departments within your organization on the same team and having equal say in creating these types of things to help you be successful. And again, folks, it's easy for me to say this. I'm not the one responsible for the budget or spending the money, but you want to focus on organization transformation and not on cost. I know cost is definitely a factor that everybody needs to think about, but I guess what I'm saying is, just don't put this stuff to the back burner. It needs to have a higher level of importance, and then hopefully it gets moved up the chain as far as budget responsibilities and commitments. So it's again something that should be often discussed. And that takes me to the end. Right. So I will open it up for questions.
That's great. Thank you, Julia. Great presentation. So to members, we have about 20 minutes for questions. And so I think what we'll do is, if everybody's okay with that, we'll do one question and a couple follow-ups and then do another round if we have time. Julia has freed up a little bit of flexible time after the 11 o'clock mark if we need to go a little bit further. But if we can kind of keep it tight, that would be great. So Gord, go first.
Well, thanks for your presentation.
Yes.
It was fantastic, and it's neat to see the progress and how you've taken steps and bringing this information to us. Just some questions as we move in this direction, and I know our province just recently we faced a ransomware in the spring and summer this year. We were, when you're moving all that information there, can you talk a little bit about the effects of moving all the information there, and are we doing a good job keeping track of like how do we prevent against something like this happening?
So specifically on your own processes, I would have to look into what you've actually done, because I don't work in government right now, so I don't understand kind of what you have done. But I think that you have to make sure, like I said, information management and records management is everybody's responsibility, and that you have the infrastructure in place, the technical infrastructure in place for auditing purposes and providing access to information so that it's protected. If there's a lot of things in a paper environment and still on paper, and the idea is to leave it in a building that's not being used, or in somebody's closet or whatever, that's not solid records management practices. And again, I think that the biggest thing is to make everybody aware of the importance of the information is something to do to be successful. But in order for me to answer your question around, are you doing a good job, I'd have to kind of review that to see what actually has been done.
Gord?
I was just watching your presentation in terms of like when you were talking about auditing and security measures, and I believe that having all the information there and going that direction is a good thing. But when I'm looking at what happens if that gets breached and somebody is in those areas that shouldn't be, and I guess
Right.
that was.
Well, that is a very key fear that a lot of people have. But again, I'll say to you, at least you know that there was a breach. If it's just a paper environment, you don't know what breaches you've actually had with that information. So again, it comes back to having the proper security measures in place around your electronic information, making sure that only people have access that need access, and you have the auditing processes in place, and the repercussions are in place, that if someone did access that information and they weren't supposed to, then they are reprimanded for that, and there's a policy in place to back that up. I can remember in health, like we were always so scared to maybe accidentally click on the wrong patient. But again, there's auditing measures in place that if somebody is in a record for 10, 15 seconds and realized, oh, wrong patient, they shut it down, that's not, you can track that, it's not necessarily a breach. But if that person has been in their next door neighbor's record for an hour just snooping around, again, you have auditing procedures in place for that. So having the systems in place and backing them up with the policies that are going to keep people accountable are very important.
Okay, Gord?
That's good to know, and I'm thinking more about internally is one thing, but externally with the breach that happened, and how are we able to diagnose that that system has been breached quickly, I guess, is a major component of the security measure. So, yeah.
Yes, for sure. And so you need to have your security team available at the front end to put those measures in place. And there's opportunities to identify a real breach versus an almost a breach, So that's why having those automated procedures in place and the auditing in place on whatever system is very important. If it's accessing a shared drive or an email that doesn't have any auditing things in the background, then that's very difficult to do. But if you have a content management system in place that can track all of that stuff, it's much easier.
Great, thanks. Thank you. Peter?
Thank you, Chair. Being aware of the time, I'm going to have to prioritize my questions here, Juliana. Thank you so much for your presentation. I've learned an awful lot this morning. It's very appreciated. We've heard from our Auditor General, our Privacy and Information Commissioner here on Prince Edward Island, and also the Information Commissioner of Canada, a recommendation, a unanimous recommendation that we should have a duty to document here on Prince Edward Island. And I'm wondering what you feel about government and having a duty to document.
I think it's very important because, again, back to the main principles of record management around being transparent and authentic, you need to document that information. But it's one thing to say you're going to document it, but if people are not trained on what is a record, what is important, because you can document things and collect information and put it all in a file, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's all part of the record. Some of it could just be, convenience information or what we call transitory type documents or temporary documents that you need at the time. But it doesn't necessarily mean that it's stuff that needs to be kept within the record for the longevity of the life cycle of that record. So understanding what a record is versus what a document is very important. So I go back to the fact that if you're going to do that and implement that process, everybody needs to be trained appropriately on how to do it effectively and understand their role in the importance of keeping that information safe.
Peter?
I appreciate that, Juliana. You mentioned, and it was right towards the end of your presentation, and it was to do with what you call traveling devices. Mm-hmm. And you said anything that is part of the transaction, we have to make sure that it gets into the record. Mm-hmm. Or I'm paraphrasing. Yes. And we're talking there, of course, about text messages, about PINs, about BBMs, things like that government frequently uses in order to communicate. And the concern there, of course, is that those fall under the transitory record category. At least they can fall under that category. So I'm wondering if you could inform the committee here what the best practices are for preserving records like that, in order that they do actually become part of the record keeping when we have a decision-making transaction which is occurring.
That's a great question, and I could come up with some suggestions for you. I'm wondering if I can bring those back to you. Absolutely. If I could make a note and come back with some good processes around that, would that be acceptable?
That'd be great.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you. Peter?
Thanks. When I ran a dental office, we adopted what was promised to be a paperless system for my office, which, of course, as you said, such a thing does not exist. But it was a very easy place to manage records because it was there were 4 or 5 of us in the office, and it was simple. Government is not simple. Government is a multi, tentacles head off in every direction, and I'm imagining that with the size and complexity of an organization, also with that comes challenges in terms of record retention. Government has made a decision to adopt Microsoft 365 as the operating system. And I'm wondering whether you feel, given the size of and complexity of government, and we've heard from the ITSS folks here that that's the system which is generally adopted throughout government in other jurisdictions, so I have no reason to believe it's not an appropriate system. But I'm wondering whether you feel that was a good choice, and if there are other choices out there.
There are certainly other choices, and I think Office, Microsoft 365 has come a long way. One of the things I would want to understand is what is the records retention abilities of the system, and can those can that stuff be applied at the front end? So what is the records management side of Office 365? And interestingly, I just started really looking into Microsoft 365 for a couple of other clients. So again, I'm new in my research around what the records management side of Office 365 is, but there's other systems out there. I mean, I'm sure you've all heard of SharePoint. Mm-hmm. There's Documentum. There's Laserfiche. Those are some of the bigger names of electronic content management systems. And regardless of what the system is, the thing that's important is that they do in fact have a records management capability attached to it, so that the life cycle of the record can be applied as soon as that record enters into that system, and that there's processes in place that when the record reaches the end of its life cycle, it can be then removed from that system. So regardless of your system, I think understanding the records retention and the ability for that within the system is extremely important.
Okay. I'm going to go to Sydney,
Sure,
but then
absolutely.
when we have extra time.
Yeah,
So
thanks,
go
Chair.
ahead, Sydney.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks so much for coming in, Juliana. I really appreciate this. It's good to see you. Your slide on enabling organizational buy-in and, the solid communication plan, giving clear expectations of roles and responsibilities. We've had presentations over like basically the amount of buy-in from each of the departments to be trained in records retention. And it's an issue in some departments. Some departments are doing a great job, some departments aren't. There's a whole number of things, as you would remember from your time within government as well, and how tricky that can be. Part of our recommendations will be about increasing that buy-in, or that even the training. Have you seen anywheres, we'll say with governments or municipalities, any trend or any buy-in towards privatizing that training in as someone coming from the private sector?
Yes, it's yes, because I've been brought in to do it myself. So I guess I have seen it where that's exactly what people do, because it's sometimes the resources can be strapped initially around having enough people in place to tackle that training and to set up a solid training and communications plan. So showing the organization that you support the importance of it by bringing in extra resources to help the existing ones that are there is key. And the other thing I've noticed is that sometimes folks like to do things the way they've always done it. So whether they're a records manager or a modern records management user, they don't really see the importance of changing. And sometimes it does take someone from outside the organization to come in to kind of help them see that. And I recently was part of I did a records management training session for a municipality, and the CAO brought in the who he felt would be the modern records management users. And one of the things that came out at the end of the presentation or training session was that this was extremely helpful, but also they wanted to do another session with the managers, senior managers, other people within the organization, because those folks are modern records management users as well, and they need to be educated. So the training is one thing, but making sure that the training plan includes everybody throughout the organization is also extremely important. And sometimes having a records manager that's within the system training their boss or their senior management team around records management isn't necessarily the best way to go about that. So bringing in outside help to assist with that can sometimes really show that you're committed to making sure everybody understands.
Sid?
Good, thank you.
That's good. All right.
Thank you.
So we've talked around, well, when we had the information and privacy commissioners in, I think one of the comments that was made is sometimes it's just easier to submit a FOIP request because, you know, the information's not accessible, easily accessible, and when you ask for it, you don't necessarily get it in a timely manner. So, which puts a lot of pressure then on how many FOIP requests we come through. So, I guess one of the ways to work around that would be to routinely or proactively disclose records, so that there is more of an open government type process out there. So, do you have any kind of advice on what that could look like if we were to look at that as a recommendation?
Well, I think one of the I used to work in kind of in the FOIP office in health, and one of the things that we noticed was that because of it being such a paper-based world, that's where the difficulty lied as far as collecting the information, and not necessarily even knowing where that information has been stored for years. Mm-hmm. So I think my recommendations there would be coming back to getting stuff, you know, using digital technology to help get all of that information into one location so that it is easier to find. And again, providing the training and communication to everyone within the organization about how then to manage that information so that it is available when it's requested. And again, in a paper world, that's really difficult to do. And it was part of my role to train people on records and information management. And when you're trying to explain the importance of that to, say, a nurse, for example. A nurse is a nurse. She's a hands-on, he or she is a hands-on person that is really involved in the care of the patient. Mm-hmm. And managing the paper can be considered an afterthought in some cases, although charting is extremely important. But I think, again, bringing back the importance of how that information is going to affect everybody's jobs and how they need to be responsible for looking after it it would be a huge kind of help to getting this stuff more regulated. It's one thing to say that we have these policies and procedures in place, but if you're not training everyone in the organization on the importance and what it means and how it affects them on a day-to-day basis, then it's not going to be successful.
Okay, thank you. Something else that we've heard from ITSS is they have, because it's 365 days after something has been deleted. So an email, for instance, has been deleted. It's maintained for 365 days. Can you tell me what the typical, deletion time frame would be? Is that in the realm of like how long those logs should be kept, even when it's proxy access and different things that we only keep it for 365 days?
So again, that would depend on what the life cycle of that particular record is. So in a paper world, or in any world, again, a record is a record. If the life cycle is that record is to be kept as long as that file is current, and then and I'll just use a project file, for example. So you've started a new project, and the retention period on project files is current year, and then maybe you keep it 2 years semi-active, and then it moves inactive for, say, it's 10 years. So at 10 years, if that file is supposed to be deleted, it should be deleted. And if it's deleted, it shouldn't be sticking around for 365 days after it's been deleted. Because, so again, if you're following the records management practices, then once it's deleted, it's deleted. And if that email, so my question back to you is, what record did that email belong to? And is that record supposed to be retained for 25 years or 2 years? So it's not necessarily, the process around deletion really comes back to what's the life cycle of that record and what record did that email belong to.
Right. And I guess that comes down to the modern record user and whether they were practicing
Proper records management practices.
Okay.
Yes.
I think, Peter, I have you next if you...
Thanks. And one of the jobs of this committee, Juliana, is to look into records deletion, specifically email records deletion, which occurred in government a little while ago. And I'm wondering if we are to adopt best practices, who within an organization typically should have the ability to request records deletion?
It should be someone, again, requesting the records deletion comes from a retention and disposition schedule that should already be in place that gives the authority for that record to be deleted. So if you're blanketing emails as something to be deleted, that's a bit of a risky business, because the email should be attached to a record. So what is the record? And what is the retention period on the record? It's not the fact that it's an email, because an email isn't a subject. It's an email. But what record should that email be part of? And then as far as requesting the deletion, shouldn't need to be a request if the process is in place for following the life cycle of that record. You see what I mean?
I absolutely do.
Peter?
So blanket deletions are, and I mean, obviously you have to manage your risk and understand that there's a lot of stuff to deal with to get to a current state of moving forward. And some of those things need to apply. But I guess what I'd say, if you're doing a blanket deletion on emails, you do have to understand what records are being deleted, what was the retention schedule around those records, and is it safe to delete them based on that?
Peter?
Really appreciate that answer, Juliana. Who makes the determination as to whether a particular email is a record that needs to be kept as part of a transaction or a decision, and what can be discarded? Is that the owner of the email, or does somebody else also have that authority?
Again, if we are looking at the modern records management users, that's where the knowledge of understanding what is a record and what needs to be kept is extremely important for everybody in the organization to know, because it should be the person, receiving the information and needing at least to understand the records management practices. And what the procedures are within your organization around that. So maybe they do have someone else that they can check with. That might be part of the process within that department. Maybe they know themselves that yes, this attachment. Let's just use a simple one and say it's an invoice for something. Well, that invoice is a huge part of a transaction. So if you're receiving that email yourself, Peter, then you should probably have the ability to just file that away. or you have someone in your staff that would have the ability to access your email to do that. Again, it's very departmental specific depending on what role each person plays. But that's where teaching and understanding and training around records management is extremely important for everyone.
Peter?
I'm starting to realize that. It's you talked earlier about memory is cheap, or terabytes, or we can do that, but then we just become information hoarders. We don't actually manage that information terribly well. And I hear very loud and clear from you that the responsibility lies with individuals within organizations to make sure, and for the organization to train individuals to make sure that they are aware of what the responsibilities are. I'm wondering, in terms of you've talked a little bit about digital footprint or fingerprint or whatever, I can't remember how you described it, of going into a record and it being available later on to know who has accessed that record. How long should those kinds of logs be kept? Again, is that a very specific related to the information?
Well, that would be considered our record, and there would be a retention period applied to that type of auditing type of document. So again, that's based on the organization to develop what that is based on best practices and normal course of business. So again, audit documents are considered a record. So off the top of my head, I can't tell you what that is, but there's probably a retention and disposition schedule somewhere that has that in it, and it will clearly tell you how long it needs to be kept. And that's what should become part of answering a lot of these questions. Is everybody needs to understand there is a document somewhere here in government that advises what those retention periods are, and if there's not, then there should be. And that's the very highest level of authority, is following that retention and disposition schedule and understanding the records that you're using every day, how they fit into that schedule and what the retention period is for those records.
Peter?
Thanks, Chair. Can I?
It's
one or
okay.
two?
Okay, yep.
Just one or two more
Good.
questions.
I'll get Juliana just to give me a 5-minute warning then.
Yes, that's
Okay.
fine.
Thanks. And clearly, policies and procedures have changed dramatically over the last 10 or 20 years. And I'm wondering, when you were involved in government, Juliana, what the culture of records management was within government at that time. And I know things have changed. I'm just wondering, where we were back then.
Mm-hmm. So it was, when I became the Records and Information Management Coordinator for PHSA, there was, I think, 7 of us at the time, and we were 7, and I'm just speaking about health specifically. So there was 7 of us across the island that that had that particular role. And we were given the authority to create the retention and disposition schedule for the records for the Provincial Health Services Authority, which then got brought back to senior management, and they appreciated and respected our input in creating that document. And then, of course, we, because we knew it had to go through legal, and we followed all the correct procedures. So that was great. But then through restructuring, something I've noticed is that the responsibility of records management has decreased somewhat to being off the side of people's desks. And the resources that are needed kind of, I felt, got pulled back a little bit over then the next number of years. And again, now that we're into, looking at terminology around modern records management users, I think it's extremely important that okay, we're lacking in maybe resources for people to manage all of that information for us. So the communication now needs to be, we are all responsible. for it. So it's not something, yes, you need people to, and you need the professionals, just like you need a legal expert, you know, and the right number of those people around you to make good decisions. You also need to make sure that you have the right records management professionals around to assist government. And I think that is still, unfortunately, still lacking in that level of support, or the level of resources available to make sure that everybody in government understands the importance of records management. I think it does need to be improved.
Peter?
Again, I appreciate that, Juliana, and you've sort of hinted a couple of times that assigning adequate resources to records management is really important in terms of the quality of the system you have, in terms of protecting it and also making it accessible. This committee is tasked with making recommendations back to the legislature on what a top-notch gold standard records management system is here. Would it be fair to say that one of your recommendations, I'm reading between the lines here, Juliana, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that government makes sure that it commits adequate resources to make sure that we have a system, not just a system in place, but the human resources available to manage that system properly in order to get to that gold standard system.
Yes, 100%. And I guess just to add to that, I know that there's different roles within every department. And there would be some roles like admin assistants and executive assistants and you know, office managers, so on. People would normally think that, okay, we'll just tag records management onto their existing job. Well, we have to understand that that might be feasible, but that person may already have a full-time equivalent job that is full, and they don't have the ability to kind of do records management properly, or make sure that records management is done properly within their department. So yes, assigning appropriate resources so that it's not just something that someone is expected to do and manage as an add-on task. It's given its own responsibility. And then with that, the other important piece that I think might be missing is the communication around everybody understanding that it's their role as the modern records management user to be part of a solid records management system. That I think that's that's the biggest gap I see is the resources around training and communicating to people that it's everybody's responsibility.
Do you have any further?
Yeah, I do,
Okay.
actually.
All right, Peter?
Maybe there is no formula for this, Juliana, but I'd be interested in your thoughts on it. Whether all of us individually have responsibilities to do this, but as you've just said, there are specific skills and expertise required in order to do it properly. In an organization, is there any sort of formula for, you know, per 100 employees we should have 0.5 records management expert? We have designated people in each government department, and those numbers vary depending on the size of the department, but I'm wondering whether there is a formula that would give us an idea as to whether we are appointing adequate resources for this.
That would be one I'd have to come back to you on. I can certainly, because right now I don't know what your number of resources are that you have in place, but I can certainly provide you with some recommendations from other provincial governments on where I see them being very successful around records management. I can reach out to them and get some information for you.
That'd be great. I have one
Peter?
final question,
Yeah,
please. You know, records deteriorate. You talked earlier about sitting in boxes and things, but is deterioration of digital records a thing? And at what, you know, can we assume that records that we digitize now are going to be accessible and available to us 100 years from now?
Right. So there's one thing that we do need to kind of assume that's going to happen is that that the organization is going to continue upgrading their hardware, software, and IT infrastructure to ensure that those records stay available. A good example is when Word Perfect was around, and then everybody switched over to Word, and some of those documents, became maybe unreadable. So there are, but there, again, that comes back around creating policies to protect that information, like creating PDFs and ensuring that you have the IT infrastructure in place that will constantly upgrade, and that any software you purchase does not have any proprietary things in place as far as the software vendor goes, that you upfront say that we will always be able to pull that information out of that system. So all of those things are in place so that the electronic records will continue to move forward with the technology. Having said that, anything that has a permanent retention, the only real true way to ensure that that's going to happen is microfilm. And I know it's something that people don't think of much these days, but I still have many clients that will, they'll digitize everything and use the digital records to access their information. But if they want that information to be tucked away in a secure vault, they also will put it on microfilm as a backup. So it's microfilm still being created, but it's used in very different ways these days. We are digitizing a lot of microfilm so that easy access is made for that information, but the microfilm is still there to protect that record's longevity. But again, paper is probably the least effective way to keep things for a really long time, because I'm sure if you've seen a file where, let's say, just a large format, let's use a plot plan or a land document, for example. I've seen where those are folded up and placed in file folders, and when you go to actually open that record and open up that document, it's literally falling apart. It's creased so badly that it's getting hard to read the information on it. So how is that preserving information that is going to be needed 50 years from now? Because land is not going to change. It's going to always be here. We always want to have access to that information. That's just kind of one example. So keeping things, and I mean, there's also ways around climate-controlled environments to be used to protect and preserve that paper for a longer period of time. But again, it still doesn't help the access to the information.
Right. Okay.
Thank you. I'm good.
You're
Thank you,
good?
Chair.
Great.
Thanks,
Thank you,
Juliana.
Peter. Does anybody else have any other questions? I just have one follow-up, and another, like Peter had mentioned, we will be coming back with recommendations to the Legislative Assembly, and I just wanted to expand on something that Sydney had asked, and that was just around training. Mm-hmm. And so what is a time period in which, would be, I guess, an allowable time frame to let an employee go before they actually receive training on record?
It should be onboarding
Yeah.
as soon as they come into the organization.
Okay.
It should be part of their orientation, if that's what you mean, like a new employee.
Yeah. And then when we made changes, that was when the training came in, I think it was 2018, with changes to the Act, that's when the training was developed, so you'd have catch-up to do. But again, in that catch-up, what would be an allowable timeframe to allow somebody to go?
Again, I think it should be immediate, as soon as possible would be my quick answer to that, on not knowing kind of the circumstances around it. But again, people deal with records every day, so you have to assume what risks are involved with having someone not adequately trained on how to protect and use this information, versus the convenience or not having the resources to train people quickly enough. and adequately enough.
Right. Okay, and thank you for that, Juliana. And
Okay.
I think everybody has had an opportunity to ask all their questions, and I think the information that you brought forward to us is extremely important, and so glad that you accepted our invite to come and share with us today and talk about best practices within records management. And I know we went a little bit over.
That's okay.
I appreciate you
Yeah.
taking that extra time.
I didn't want to make anybody feel rushed.
No.
And I just want to say thank you for having me. I do have some follow-up questions that I will provide answers back to Ryan and yourself and
Yeah.
to share with the committee. And if there's ever anything else you need, I'm just a phone call away.
Great. Thank
Yeah.
you so much.
Okay.
We'll
Thank
take
you.
a quick recess and then we'll reset.
Okay, awesome.
All right, so we will continue on with our agenda. We are now on item number 4, and we do have some correspondence to review. So firstly, we have a letter back from Caroline Maynard, Information Commissioner of Canada. As part of her letter, she referenced possibly inviting officials from the Treasury Board Secretariat. And so I will open the floor for discussion on this to see how we'd like to proceed as a committee. Any comments? Gord?
Yeah, I think we should pursue that and hear from them, and it's a great suggestion by her, so be in
Okay.
favor of that.
Okay.
Same.
Pete? Okay. So, Ryan, the decision would be that we would like to hear from the the Treasury Board Secretariat. And then I will note that she does state, as I previously indicated, and Peter, you referenced this a few minutes ago, I'm a full supporter of the duty to document, so she did answer that question for us. Any other discussion on that item? I'm going to skip to the third letter that we have from Cindy Harris. So this is the follow-up information from Ed Malone. And I will open the floor for discussion on this correspondence as well and how we would like to proceed, if there's any further action that the committee would like to take based on this information. No further action? Okay, thank you. And the final correspondence was based on questions that we had asked and have had responses to that we'll hold off to discuss until we're ready to discuss the report further. Okay, so that is correspondence. Was there any other further correspondence that anybody's received that they would like to discuss? So we'll move on to item number 5, so review of scheduling. Ryan, I will hand it over to you, so you could just take us through that again.
Certainly. The next meeting is Wednesday, October 28th at 10 a.m. At that meeting, the witnesses appearing will be Brad Mix and Bobby Joe Dow Baker. And following that, the subsequent meeting is, bear with me one second. Friday, November 6th, also at 10 a.m., and Melissa James and Chris LeClaire will be appearing at that meeting.
Okay, and at that meeting, we'll be looking at a 1-hour allotment per witness. Okay. Is there any other scheduling that anybody would like to discuss? Hal?
The Freedom of Information and Privacy Order dated June of 2020 this year, which forms part of our mandate, had stated or made some serious statements about the Department of Economic Growth, Tourism and Culture. So given those facts and the matters that go very much to the heart of government's handling of records and retention, I move that we call in Aaron McGrath-Goody to explain to the department's handling of record management. And furthermore, I move that the invitation be issued as a priority because the context is very relevant to our current work.
Okay, so that's a motion.
Yeah.
So a motion on the floor is to call Aaron McGrath Goody as a priority witness to come and discuss the handling of the information and privacy FOIP request and that ruling in June. So I'll open that up to discussion from members. Sydney?
Yeah, I agree. What does a priority mean? Do you want to bump somebody else?
No. We have 6 months, so we have 6 more weeks left. So if we have to have a meeting during the session, then, you know, we all agreed to be on this committee, and we have a mandate, and I think it's imperative that we have her in, because it even, you know, states in there that we have to look at current practices related to it. So if we can meet during the session, that would be great. And I'm sure we'd be able to do it within 6 weeks.
Okay, Sydney?
Yeah, I
Okay,
agree.
you okay? So we have agreement. Ryan, as per scheduling, just if there's a space within the committee schedule that would work, that we could schedule, would the committee members be fine using space that might have been opened up from another committee that has completed meeting or is no longer meeting, I guess, publicly, or might be working on a report? Would everybody be okay if Ryan can fit that time slot in as well? Okay, and just to clarify one thing, Hal, this committee, our mandate is to respond back within 6 months,
Yeah.
but we have to table in while the legislature is sitting.
Yeah.
So our time frame is a little bit shorter, which would be great if we could schedule it even before the legislature starts.
I'm okay with
anything
that.
can- Okay,
Great.
perfect.
Thank you.
So all in favor? All right, so we will issue that request for appearance for Aaron Goody McGrath. Is there anything, Gord?
A motion I'd like to bring to the floor too. When I talked about today and before the ransomware issues that our province have had, we spent over $1 million addressing the breach in privacy. And I would like to move to call the Minister of Finance in to appear before the committee to explain steps taken to protect records, the cost of the breach, and any changes to our system that will prevent this from happening in the future.
Okay, so Gord, I will ask, based on the motion 86, under what resolve statement would that fall under? So just to point out, I mean, it's to create a special committee of 6 was one of them. A committee to study the missing records referred to in the Information and Privacy Commissioner's orders and the current practices related to electronic records and security, and then that we report back within 6 months.
Under the current practices related to electronic records and security.
Okay. I'll open that up for discussion from the committee. Does anybody have comments or thoughts? The motion on the floor is to request the Minister of Finance to come in and discuss the data breach that occurred in February timeframe. Okay, if there's no
Particular problem with that. I know
Peter?
when representatives from ITSS were here, some questions were asked about that, and there was some, what I thought, fairly fulsome answers given, but I have no issue with this.
Okay, so to point out, oh no, I'm thinking PAC. We can't have a minister come into this one. I'm thinking of the rules of PAC. So is there any other further discussion before we go to a vote? Okay, is everybody in favor of having the Minister of Finance come in to discuss that? Okay, so all in favor? Is there any other reviewing of schedule? Sydney?
Thanks, Chair. There's 2 motions put forward today to start inviting more guests. We've been at this for a while. Certainly don't want to limit the guests, but I would advise us that if we've got guests to bring in, we wrap it up in the next little bit, because we have to get this report done as well. bringing in the Minister of Finance is great to figure out what, what the update on it is. I wonder if there's another committee doing it as well, but I also know that that department is heavy into a capital budget as well right now, so I don't know how quick that turnaround could be, but I would put forward that if any members have any additional guests, like, can we put kind of like a early next week, or, it's getting pretty late in the game, like, we could have invited Aaron months ago. That's that's what spurred on this whole committee, so I think it's a great idea. It's just, can we maybe agree that we have, is that okay to put does anybody have any thoughts, like, when is the last time we can start inviting people in, or should we just say?
So we are meeting next Wednesday. If somebody wanted to put forward that possibly next Wednesday would be the final day in order to invite new witnesses, so that we can wrap up who we've already got on our schedule and add the new appearances that have been in place today, then we could have that discussion and vote on that. So is that something you?
What do you guys think? By next Wednesday?
Okay. Okay. So we've agreed that as of Wednesday, let you give me the date. No? The 28th. Wednesday, the 28th, all final motions for witnesses will be brought forward, and then we'll go forward after that with who we have. Okay, thank you for that, everyone. So if there's no more reviewing of our schedule, any new business? And with no further new business, I'll call for a motion to adjourn. Gord. All right, thanks, everyone. Have a great day.